All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecture writer, and historian. So it is Monday, September 6th, 2021. It's Labor Day, and we are live. So I'm not doing my radio show tonight, but I wanted to come on today and talk about the African American origins of Labor Day. You know, every Labor Day, you have Labor Day parades. You'll have mentions of Labor Day on news programs, things like that. But oftentimes, the African American contributions and African American origins regarding Labor Day are not discussed. So we're going to talk about that today. Hope everybody's doing well. And, you know, this history deals with Frederick Douglass. It deals with Isaac Myers and the uh, colored labor colored colored labor union. It deals with Frederick Douglass. It deals with Phillip Randolph, and a lot of names of African Americans we don't know about. Okay, so if we look at some of this history, and I'm going to refer to a PowerPoint presentation here also that I put together today. I'm going to refer to my written notes, but I'm also going to refer to a PowerPoint presentation here. And everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in as well. We're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. All right. And my radio shows on Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, and Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also broadcast here on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. But I'm on 910 a.m. Superstation WFDF here in Detroit. You can download the iHeartRadio app. You can listen to our show live. Just search for 910 a.m. Superstation. And also you can listen to audio podcasts of the African History Network show through iHeartRadio as well. So what is Labor Day? Okay. What is Labor Day? Labor Day 2021 falls on Monday, September 6th. And Labor Day pays tribute to the contributions and achievements of American workers and is traditionally observed on the first Monday in September. Traditionally observed on the first Monday in September. And it also serves as the unofficial end of summer as well. But it was created by the labor movement in the late 19th century, late 1800s, and became a federal holiday in 1894. Okay, it was President Grover Cleveland that signed it into law, signed Labor Day into law as a way to appease the labor movement during a huge strike that was taking place. We're going to talk about that also. And this deals with the history of the Pullman porters and George Pullman, who founded the Pullman Car Company. He also founded Pullman, Illinois, as well. This is a very, very deep history. Okay, so we see it, the official federal holiday goes back to 1894. And Labor Day weekend also symbolizes the end of summer for many Americans. And we know a lot of school children go back to school after Labor Day. And Labor Day is often celebrated with parties, street parades, and athletic events as well. All right, now let's continue here. So and I want to refer to my notes here as well, because this deals with a lot of history also. Now, the labor movement fought for fair wages and to improve working conditions, as is well known. But it was the political efforts that did nothing less than transform American society. Okay, organized labor was critical in the fight against child labor, and organized labor was critical in fighting for the 8-hour work week. All right. And, you know, a lot of things that we enjoy today when it comes to labor, a lot of times people just take those for granted, or maybe think it was always like that, and don't understand the history, the fight that took place to get things like the 8-hour work week, or to get child labor laws, etc. All right. And then also we see labor involved in the fight for the New Deal and New Deal policies. And it's the New Deal during World War II under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt that's going to give us the Social Security Administration, the Social Security Act of 1935. It's going to give us unemployment insurance. It's under the New Deal also that you get the Minimum Wage Act of 1935 as well. Okay. So union workers sacrificed in America's historic production. And let's change this here. Okay. Union workers sacrificed in America's historic production effort in World War II and pushed for Great Society legislation in the 1960s. Okay, Great Society programs under President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, Michael Patrick, a former local machinist, president from Galesburg, Illinois, cites his union's support for Medicare and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as among his local union's proudest moments. Now, though those shared victories came at a cost, however, those shared victories came at a cost. Agitation for antitrust legislation, shorter work days and work weeks, and the right to organize was often portrayed as being un-American, and violently repressed. In 1914, John Kirby, who was the president of the National Association of Manufacturers, called the trade union movement, quote, an un-American, illegal, and infamous conspiracy. An un-American, illegal, and infamous conspiracy. And let me increase, let's see here, let me adjust that. All right, now, anti-labor employers fought against what they saw as incipient communism with strike breaking, blacklisting, vigilante violence, and by enlisting government force to their side. So a lot of people that were involved in the labor movement and fighting for better wages and trying to unionize and things like this, they get labeled as communists. Okay, they get labeled as communists and get labeled as anti-American. Now, during the Red Scare of about 1919 and 1921, many states passed blanket sedition laws against radical speech and banned the flying of the red flag. Now, when we look at the Red Scare, okay, just some brief information here dealing with the Red Scare. This was linking many American workers fighting for fair wages and things like this, linking them to communism and linking them to Russia. Now, the Red Scare was hysteria over the perceived threat by communists in the U.S. during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, which intensified in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Communists were often referred to as Reds for their allegiance to the red Soviet flag. Now, the Red Scare led to a range of actions that had a profound and enduring effect on U.S. government and society. Federal employees were analyzed to determine whether they were sufficiently loyal to the U.S. government, and the U.S. Un-American Activities Committee, the House of Representatives Un-American Activities Committee, as well as U.S. Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, investigated allegations of subversive elements in the government and the Hollywood film industry. All right. Now, the climate of fear and repression linked to the Red Scare finally began to ease in the late 1950s. But we're going to see this also in 1919, 1920, 1921. Now, here's a picture of Senator Joseph McCarthy, Republican of Wisconsin. He was a senator from Wisconsin from 1947 to 1957. Okay. All right. Now, the first Red Scare goes back to 1917. Okay. During World War I. World War I is 1914 to 1918. The first Red Scare occurred in the wake of World War I. The Russian Revolution in the 1917s saw the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, topple the Romanov dynasty, kicking off the rise of the Communist Party and inspiring international fear of Bolsheviks and anarchists. In the United States, labor strikes were on the rise, and the press sensationalized these labor strikes as being caused by immigrants bent on bringing down the American way of life. Okay, immigrants who were here and working in unsafe conditions and things like this, oftentimes they get blamed for bringing down the American way of life. The Sedition Act of 1918 targeted people who criticized the government, monitoring radicals and labor union leaders with the threat of deportation. Okay, you can read more information about the Red Scare at history.com. History.com's official website of the History Channel, and they take you through different phases of the Red Scare through the 1917, 1920, 21, then through the 1940s and 50s. Okay, now Labor Day began not as a national holiday, but in the streets when on September 5th, 1882, thousands of bricklayers, printers, blacksmiths, railroad men, cigar makers, and others took a day off and marched in New York City. All right. And let me go back. Let me see something. Let me go back. Okay. Yeah, I'm on the right slide. Okay. So Labor Day began not as a national holiday, but in the streets when on September 5th, 1882, thousands of bricklayers, printers, blacksmiths, railroad men, cigar makers, and others took a day off and marched to New York City. They were saying things like 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, read one sign. Another sign said, labor creates all wealth. Labor creates all wealth. Now, a placard in the following year's parade read, we must crush the monopolies lest they crush us. We must crush the monopolies lest they crush us. Now, the movement for the holiday grew city by city. Movement for Labor Day holiday grew city by city. And eventually the state and federal authorities made it official. Okay. TheAtlantic.com has a really good article dealing with Labor Day's origins called When Labor Day Meant Something. When Labor Day Meant Something. Now, also very quickly here, anytime I speak, I may say some things that are outside the circumference of some people's awareness. So just because I say something that people disagree with or what have you, does not mean that what I'm saying is not true. Just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. What I'm saying may be outside the circumference of your own awareness. Okay. Usually how people put their fingers together to form a circle. I usually say something like this: the space inside the circle represents my realm of knowledge. Everything that I think I know about whatever I think I know is represented within the circumference of the circle. I must keep in mind that there's still things to know that exist outside the circumference of my own awareness. All right. So just because you know everything that you know about what you know does not mean you know everything there is to know about what you know. There's still things that exist outside the circumference of your own awareness. And I learned this from one of my teachers, Dr. Ray Hagins, also. All right, from the African Village. Okay. Share this broadcasting on social media platforms. Be sure to follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Also, turn on live notifications so you know when we go live. If you like this type of information, you can also support us, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, because we're here 6 days a week. I broadcast our radio show 6 days a week, and this helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. For Sunday night, my show is on Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, and the radio station was giving everybody else the day off. But so I took the day off also. So I'll be back live on the air Tuesday, back on the air live Tuesday. All right, let's continue here. So why do we celebrate Labor Day? Why do we celebrate Labor Day? And now for some people, Labor Day is just a day off from work. Some people, Labor Day is the last day off before children go back to school, or the last time they could take a vacation, the last day of vacation, what have you. But Labor Day is something much more significant than that. Now, Labor Day, an annual celebration of workers and their achievements, originated during one of American labor history's most dismal chapters. Okay. And this ties into the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution also has connections to slavery, especially in Great Britain, because the Industrial Revolution is going to start in England in the 1790s. Now, in the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, the United States, in the United States, the average American worked 12-hour days. Okay, in the late 1800s, the average American worked 12-hour days and 7 days a week in order to scratch out a basic living. Despite restrictions in some states, children as young as 5 years old or 6 years old worked in mills, worked in factories and mines across the country, and they were earning a fraction of what the adults were earning. Okay. Now, people of all ages, particularly the very poor and recent immigrants coming to this country, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, and taking breaks, bathroom breaks, lunch breaks, etc. So when we look at the Industrial Revolution, okay, the Industrial Revolution marked a period of development in the latter half of the 18th century, latter half of the 1700s, that transformed largely rural agrarian societies in Europe, especially in England, because it's going to start in England, and America into industrialized urban areas. Now, goods that had once been painstakingly crafted by hand started to be produced in mass quantities by machines in factories, thanks to the introduction of new machines and techniques in textiles, iron making, and other industries. So because of technological advancements, okay, we're going to see mass production of products. We're going to see mass production of products. And also, because of the transatlantic slave trade, the European nations, especially England, are going to be able to find an almost endless amount of raw materials, especially in Africa. Okay. So this is all going to contribute to this. Then also in 1790, right around 1793, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. The cotton gin makes it easier to pick the seeds out of cotton, which increases the production, which increases the need for cotton, lowers the labor cost of cotton, and creates a big demand for cotton as well, which then creates a greater demand for enslaved Africans. All right, now there was a piece this is from the BBC. I'm going to go to this here in just a second. This is slave trade and the British economy. This is a good piece from the BBC that gives a good synopsis here. Hold on, let me pull this up here. Just a second. I have it up in Firefox, but I can't find it. I have about 100 tabs open in Firefox, literally. And then I'm in Google Chrome right now, but I can't find it. So let's look at this here. We're going to go to, this is slide 3, I think it is. Okay, well, let's look at this. This takes us to the beginning. It has some different slides here. We'll look at the first slide because all this history is connected. All this history is connected here. Okay. Okay, we'll come back to this. Fueled by the game-changing use of steam power, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain and spread to the rest of the world, including the United States, by the 1830s and 40s. Now, it starts in the 1790s in England, okay? Modern historians often refer to this period as the First Industrial Revolution to set it apart from a second period of industrialization that took place from the late 19th century to the early 20th centuries, and saw rapid advances in the steel, electric, and automobile industries. So what's taking place, because of advancements in technology, because of being able to mass produce products, because of having greater access to an almost endless amount of raw materials, this creates the Industrial Revolution. And then in these factories that are being built, and more factories being built, you need people in the factories. So, and you have a shift from the agricultural based economy to a more industrial based economy. So then as these people are going into these factories, there's a lack of laws. There's a lack of laws to protect them. There's a lack of laws dealing with when they could take breaks and how long they have to work and things like this. Then you see a need for them to have organized labor to fight on behalf of the workers. All right, now, if we look at this here, okay. More efficient mechanized production meant Britain's new textile factories could meet the growing demand for cloth, both at home and abroad, where the nation's many overseas colonies provided a captive market for its goods. In addition to textiles, the British iron industry also adopted new innovations. So we see these advancements in technology. Also, we see that wool was like the dominant fabric that they're producing in England. But then when cotton becomes king, cotton is going to surpass the production of wool. All right. And you're going to need more and more cotton mills, cotton factories, things like this. Okay, now let's look at this next slide. Then we're going to go to this piece here from the BBC. So if we look at slavery and industrial revolution, from 1750 onwards, a new industry emerged in Britain, the production of cotton cloth. Wool production had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had one key advantage. Machinery could process cotton fibers better than wool. Machinery could process cotton fibers better than wool. And they were growing a lot of wool in England because, you know, wool comes from sheep. All right. But the machinery could process cotton better than it could wool fiber, which was another advantage for cotton. Disadvantage for us, but is another advantage for cotton. Now, as a result, it was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began, particularly in and around Manchester, England. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations, which shows the foundation of this Industrial Revolution going to slavery and slave labor. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. Okay, so I'm going to look at this next piece here. This is from the BBC. and this deals with slave trade and the British economy. Slave trade and the British economy, and this is the piece that some of this information comes from. Okay, the slave trade and the British economy. Take a look at this. Just 1 second. I'll be right back. Take a look at this. All right. So if we look at this here, this is page 1. I'm going to focus in on page 3, but we'll look at the information here on page 1. Okay. How's everybody doing? All right. Let's see here. So if we look at the history of slavery in terms of its horrific impact in the 18th and 19th century, financial considerations dominated the interests of those involved in the slave trade. African slaves were seen as property, and their experience as human beings was really not considered. To understand the extent to which Britain has been shaped by the transatlantic slave trade, it is important to consider the scale and breadth of slavery's impact on the British economy. So just briefly here, because I want to focus in on page, and I have a lot of information to get through. They break this down by year. 1700, 80% of British exports go to Europe. 1700, okay, they're going, okay. Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow are small ports. 80% of British exports go to Europe. 1711, South Sea Company is set up. 1711 goes 1733. Molasses Act bans import of foreign sugar to North America. 1750, cotton production emerges as major British industry. 1760, Glasgow becomes main UK tobacco importer. Now, slavery's going on here because they haven't. England's going to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade in 1807. England enters into treaties with other European nations. They're going to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade, but they're going to allow slavery to continue in the British territories. The U.S. abolishes the international transatlantic slave trade in 1808, January 1st, 1808. It goes into effect. It passed Congress March 2nd, 1807. Okay, and that's stipulated by the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, that put a 20-year clause in the U.S. Constitution stating that the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade could be abolished would be 1808. So if you go to congress.gov, if you go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, and if you go to archives.gov, and you look at the U.S. Constitution, and you go to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, it talks about how the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade can be abolished is 1808. And that means bringing Africans into this country to enslave them. Now, when that went into effect in 1808, it made it illegal to bring Africans into the country to enslave them. But you could still have African slaves in the country. You can still have auctions, things like this. This was dealing with actually bringing them into the country. That was illegal. Okay. And for more information on this, you go to, it was a ton of information, but you can go to history.gov, official website of the History Channel, and search for March 2nd, 1807. Congress abolishes the African slave trade. March 2nd, 1807. Politico.com. I've done an entire lecture dealing with the history of the Amistad slave ship. This ties into the Amistad slave ship and the U.S. Supreme Court case of 1841 dealing with the Amistad that you see dramatized in the movie Amistad from about 1997. Okay, with Morgan Freeman and Jamon Hansu. Okay, and they win their freedom in those Africans on the Amistad slave ship. They win their freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case. If you go to if you go to archives.gov, which is the National Archives, and you look up the Amistad slave ship case, okay, one, they have some of the original court documents there that you can read. Two, the first thing they tell you is that when those Africans were captured in Sierra Leone in 1839, they tell you that it violated all the international treaties at the time. Okay. And the reason why is because the various European nations has signed treaties to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade. Okay. And if we just look at this briefly here, because all this history is connected, some people should go read before they post here on my thread. This is at archives.gov. This is about the Amistad slave ship case, which goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. They win their freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court because it was illegal for that ship to come into the U.S. waters in the first place. Okay. But if you go to archives.gov and just search for the Amistad case, just very briefly here, in February 1839, Portuguese slave hunters abducted a large group of Africans from Sierra Leone and shipped them to Havana, Cuba, a center for the slave trade. This abduction violated all of the treaties then in existence. This abduction violated all of the treaties then in existence. Okay. Because European nations have signed treaties to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade. Now, England is not going to abolish actually having slaves till 1833, and they're going to pay reparations to about 46,000 slave owners. Okay, the U.S. Abolishes the international transatlantic slave trade. That goes into effect March 2nd, 1800. Well, it goes into effect January 1st, 1808. It passes Congress March 2nd, 1807. But these Europeans here in this country are going to continue to bring Africans into this country, which was illegal, okay, which forms a legal foundation for reparations because they violated federal law. They violated federal law. And one of the biggest U.S. Supreme Court cases is of the Amistad slave ship. And they tell you that when you read about that court case with the Amistad, they tell you it was illegal for the ship to come into U.S. waters in the first place because the international transatlantic slave trade had been abolished. Okay, so if you go read this here, additional background, let's see back up here. Okay, Amistad case, then they have additional background, and then you could read what the ruling was in this case. All right, and they go through and break all this down, and one of the things they say is that those Africans on the ship, they had the right to take up arms to defend themselves because there was a mutiny on the ship. Okay. The district court ruled that the case fell within federal. District court ruled that the case fell within federal jurisdiction and that the claims of the Africans as property were not legitimate because they were illegally held as slaves. The U.S. District Attorney filed an appeal to the Supreme Court. So then it goes to the Supreme Court. Okay, let me see here. In the trial before the Supreme Court, the Africans were represented by the U.S. former president and descendant of American revolutionaries, John Quincy Adams, sixth president of the United States. After he serves as president, he serves as one of their defense attorneys for the Africans on the Amistad ship. Preparing for his appearance before the court, John Quincy Adams requested papers from the lower courts. Okay, we skip over that. Africans, Adams passionately and eloquently defended the Africans' right to freedom on both legal and moral grounds, referring to treaties prohibiting the slave trade and to the Declaration of Independence. This is a deep case. The people talking about reparations, I don't know why they don't cite this U.S. Supreme Court case, because all the Africans that were brought into this country from January 1st, 1808 through about July 1860, when the Clotilda came into this country, all those Africans, that was illegal based upon federal law. I don't know why they don't cite this. I've asked them about this, some of them about this, and they just said, they just said I said, this is what I asked one of them. I said, look, I'm all for reparations. I'm for making legal arguments for reparations. I said, you can have your other strategies, but this should be part of it. You don't have to get rid of all that other stuff and $20 trillion, and you don't have to get rid of all that, but this should be part of it, because this is a legal foundation. It can be part of a legal foundation. Okay. When you go to lawmakers write laws. Lawmakers don't legislate morality. When you go to lawmakers, you go to Congress, you go to the House of Representatives for their hearing on reparations, things like this. You go to argue law. You don't go to argue morality. If you want to argue morality, go to church. Lawmakers write laws, and when they write laws, the laws can be challenged in the court of law. And if the law gets struck down in court, it gets struck down on the basis that it's unconstitutional, which means the foundation is the U.S. Constitution. If a law gets upheld in court, it gets upheld on the basis that it does not violate the U.S. Constitution. If it gets struck down in court, it gets struck down on the basis that, okay, it's unconstitutional, which means the U.S. Constitution is the foundation. Article 6, the foundational law. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution clearly tells you that the U.S. Constitution, all of the previous treaties and all of the subsequent treaties are the supreme law of the land. So when you go to argue repairing the damage for slavery reparations, you don't go arguing we didn't get paid. Because I've been studying history for 30 years and I still can't find where it says slaves are supposed to be paid. We know it was wrong, but you don't go arguing morality to lawmakers. This is why a lot of this stuff is just ass backwards. It was legal not to pay them. What we should be focusing on is what was done that was illegal. That can be the foundation of your argument, because it's right there. You got a huge U.S. Supreme Court ruling of the Amistad slave ship case that backs up the argument. But we're not focused on that. Yeah, this damage of slavery should be repaid. The real damage wasn't that we didn't get paid. The real damage, I would argue, is largely what happened after slavery ended. Because we weren't given land. We had been stripped of our nationality, stripped of our history, stripped of our culture, spiritual systems, all that. And that was not largely put back together. The Freedmen's Bureau only lasted a few years. That ended in 1872. The Freedmen's Bureau, it was underfunded. Okay. It did some positive things, but we need a Freedmen's Bureau today. The Freedmen's Bank collapsed in 1874. It's $2.9 million of our deposits that was in the Freedmen's Bank. We lost that money. Okay. And there was a lot of mismanagement, things like this. Frederick Douglass was put in charge of the Freedmen's Bank. He invested thousands of his dollars of his own money to try to prop the Freedmen's Bank up. Okay. And then you look at the massive land giveaways that took place after slavery ended. The Homestead Act of 1862 that gave away land up until one source says 1976. Another source I saw said 1988. They gave away land for over 100 years. We largely got locked out of that land giveaway. Yeah, you're going to have a few African Americans that get land. Overwhelmingly, we got locked out of that land giveaway. Southern Homestead Act of 1866 gave away about 45 million acres of land in 5 southern states. We largely got locked out of that land giveaway. Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 redistributed about 138 million acres of land. 2/3 of that land went to white people, Europeans. We largely got locked out of that land giveaway. Okay, so when you go and you study what happened after slavery, and yes, slavery was horrible, things like this. But what we have to understand is laws and policies put in place after slavery ended to continue to maldistribute wealth, power, and resources. And then Jim Crow era and then redlining and housing discrimination, all different types of things like this. A lot of those laws are still in place. So when we talk about repairing the damage, you also have to change the laws and policies that maldistributed wealth, power, and resources in the first place. Because if we all got $500,000 a day, white people have it all back, but this time next week, and the laws and policies will still be in place that are continue to inflict harm and damage. So we have to do a systems analysis when we deal with repairing the damage. That's why you have to have a study. You need a study done. One, because Americans are very ignorant of history. A lot of white people don't even understand their history. So you have to have a study done to understand the history of slavery and the damage that was done and how it was done, especially after slavery ended. And the maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources that still is taking place today. Okay. One of those pieces of the puzzle, which is extremely important, and then we're going to get back to this in just a second, but all this is connected. All this is connected. The study that came out September 2020 from the Citigroup Bank. I did a presentation on this. Some of you all saw the presentation I did. This deals with how over a 20-year period of time, the U.S. economy lost $16 trillion due to racism. And see what this study shows is how racism negatively impacts everybody. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Okay, racism that has nothing to do with not liking people, calling people racial epithets, things like that. Okay, that's bigotry. That's wrong. That's bigotry. Racism is something different. That's the power structure. Okay, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is politics. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival. So if we look at this briefly here, America could have been $16 trillion richer if not for inequities in education, housing, wages, and business investment between African Americans and white Americans over the past 20 years. We're not talking about 400 years. We're not talking about going back to 1865. We're not talking about 156 years ago with the end of chattel slavery. We're just talking about from 20 years. They're looking at from basically the year 2000 to the year 2020. America could have been $16 trillion richer if not for inequities in education, housing, wages, and business investment. Okay, new research shows, this is from Citigroup Bank. The study released by Citigroup is the latest in the body of research that attempts to quantify. This is why the study is so deep. It attempts to quantify the economic impact of systemic racism that a lot of white Republicans run around, and some of their Negro accomplices are running around saying systemic racism doesn't exist. The reason why is because they benefit from systemic racism. That's why they don't want to let the cat out the bag. They don't want to get this thing up. In Vogue said, give it up, turn it loose. They don't want to give it up and turn it loose. They're making too much money off of this, profiting from systemic racism. They don't want to level the playing field. See, when you've had privilege all your life, equality feels like oppression. They don't want to level the playing field. They don't want to deal with repairing the damage. That's why people like Senator Lindsey Graham of Kentucky attacked the $4 billion in loan forgiveness, in debt forgiveness for African American farmers and Native American farmers and Latino farmers in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. They attacked that. They called it reparations, stuff like that. But when white farmers got almost $26 billion in 2020 from the Trump administration, and African American farmers got like 1/10 of 1%, they didn't say anything about that. That was fine with them because they don't have a problem with systemic racism because they benefit from it. They just don't want to admit systemic racism exists. Because if Republicans came out and all admitted systemic racism exists and they admitted it's wrong, then the next question is going to be, well, what are you going to do about it? They don't want to do anything about it because they benefit from it. They profit from it. Gain recognizes gain. So what they do is, like Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, what they do is they have to lie and say systemic racism doesn't exist, like dumbass Larry Elder, who's running for governor of California. They just have to lie and say systemic racism doesn't exist. Citigroup Bank arrived at its $16 trillion figure after estimating African-American workers have lost $113 billion in potential wages over the past 2 decades because they could not get a college degree. 1. 2, the housing market lost about $218 billion in sales because African-American applicants could not get home loans. 3, about $13 trillion in business revenue never flowed into the economy because African-American entrepreneurs could not get access to bank loans. So when you go and read this, what it shows is how even though we may get the brunt, we get the majority of the harm for racism, is showing how racism negatively impacts everybody. Because that's less money going into the economy. Now, what it goes on to say, which is extremely important, it says the U.S. could have $5 trillion in gross domestic product, GDP, gross domestic product, which is the total value of goods and services produced in the country, total value of income also of everybody in the country as well. That's the GDP, gross domestic product. Okay, it's the total value of goods, services, and income of Americans. The U.S. could have $5 trillion in gross domestic product over the next 5 years if those gaps and others were closed today, which means changing laws and policies. This is why just cutting the check ain't gonna do it. You got to change the laws and policies that inflicted harm after slavery ended and created these structural inequities that we keep talking about. Read the rest of this here. This is a deep article. The study was done by a sister, by the way, also. There was a follow-up they had, which was an interview with the sister who headed up the study as well. But read this. Racism has cost the U.S. $16 trillion, Citigroup finds. This is from September 23rd, 2020. I'll post the link here. You can read this, okay? How's everybody doing? How y'all like this type of information? I think Lila Brown's having a good time. Okay, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. If you like this type of information, also, I teach an online course on Saturdays that deals with history from 1865 through 1968. Okay, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. It's a 10-week online course that I teach. We have a new class. It's actually going to start on September 11th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. We have a new class starting up September 11th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we go through and each class, we go through and look at about a 10-year period of history to see what happened to us after 1865. We look at the last year of the Civil War. We look at what leads up to the Civil War happening. We look at Juneteenth, 13th Amendment, General Robert E. Lee surrendering the General Ulysses S. Grant, April 9th, 1865, Appomattox Courthouse. And then we go through the Reconstruction Era, 1865 to 1877. Okay, and look at the presidential election of 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel J. Tilden, and why Reconstruction ends. And then we look at the domestic terrorism that's inflicted upon us even after Reconstruction ends as well. We look at the Jim Crow laws, Mississippi State Convention of 1890, okay, where they said we're here to exclude the Negro, and they implement poll taxes and literacy tests, because we were the African Americans were the majority of the population of Mississippi, and we're voting people into office throughout the South. There's about 2,000 African Americans who get elected to political office during Reconstruction. And then after Reconstruction ends, we're going to see a harsh crackdown and suppression of African American voting rights. 1890s, 1898 grandfather clause, all different types of things like this. We go through that period. We look at World War I, 1914 to 1918, the Red Summer, 1919, when you had over 25 major race riots in this country. The year after World War I ends, we go through Tulsa Race Massacre, June 1st, 1921, Coy Massacre in Florida, 1920, Rosewood Massacre, January 1923, Rosewood, Florida. When you go study the Rosewood Massacre, they wiped, after they ran all the African Americans out of Rosewood and took their land, they wiped Rosewood off the map. After the Rosewood Massacre of January 1923. And there's a movie by John Singleton about Rosewood. A lot of it was fictitious in the movie. It was a good movie, but a lot of it was fictitious. The character of Man, played by Ving Rhames, that was a fictitious character. He didn't even exist. So there's a lot of fictitious stuff in the movie. I did a video where we did a comparison between the real history of Rosewood and the actual movie. It was a good movie, but the real history is totally different. It ain't had no happy ending. Okay. I mean, the African Americans got out, but the movie, like Sylvester Carrier, played by Don Cheadle. Sylvester Carrier didn't ride out the town on a horse. Sylvester was killed on his mama's front porch after they killed his mama, Aunt Sarah. He shot two of the deputies. They shot him and killed him. The real history was different. Okay. I understand they got to do what they got to do to make people go see the movie, but whenever you have these movies about historical events, you have to go study the real history of the historical event. But we deal with all this, and then we deal with the World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, all that. Okay, so you can register for this 10-week online course. We're going to post a link here. We have a new class starting up Saturday, September 1st. I was going to start up September 4th, but the new session, but I pushed it back. So it's going to start up Saturday, September 1st. We're going to do this 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, we do the classes live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch them anytime. Even next year, even after the 10-week course is over with, you can go back and watch it. Okay, just so you know. All right, so you don't have to be in class live to watch. Some people are working, what have you. And then in the class, you can see me. I can't see you. So you can have your bonnet on or pajamas, what have you. I don't know the difference. Okay, I won't have pajamas on. Okay, I'll be dressed like I am now, but you can see me. I can't see you. So you don't have to worry about nothing like that. Okay, class is regularly $130. It's on sale $80. There's bonus lectures that you get as well, like my lecture dealing with Juneteenth. That we did June 2021, 2.5-hour lecture dealing with the history of Juneteenth. Also, there's a 6 digital download bundle pack of lectures, Black Migrations. You'll get that also free as well. Okay, so classes on sale $80. You can register. You get this 6 title bundle pack. You get that included. It's going to be in digital download format. Okay, all right. So we posted a link here, and it's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So you can register for that class now. We'll see you in class. Class starts up Saturday, September 11th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, let's continue here. All right. I want to go back to this piece here dealing with from the BBC. Okay, so we have this here. So this is dealing with slavery and the transatlantic slave trade in the British economy. The British economy was transformed by the transatlantic slave trade. In 1700, 80% of the British trade went to Europe from ports on the east and south coast. By 1800, 100 years later, by 1800, 60% of British trade went to Africa and America, sailing from the 3 main west coast ports of Glasgow, Liverpool, and Bristol. Liverpool is where the Beatles are from, by the way. Those that are in the rock and roll. Okay. Liverpool, England. That's when I first learned about Liverpool, about the Beatles, When I started studying history, I started learning, but I knew about Liverpool. But that's where the Beatles are from. Okay, now ports such as London, ports such as London, Bristol, and Liverpool prospered as a it prospered as a direct result of involvement in the slave trade. Other parts, such as Glasgow, profited from the tobacco trade. Thousands of jobs were created in Britain supplying goods and services to slave traders. Thousands of jobs were created in Britain supplying goods and services to slave traders. In a period that saw Britain industrialize, profits could be made by exporting manufactured British goods to Africa, and then further profits accrued from imported slave products such as sugar, which became very fashionable with the British people. And we know with sugar, right? Sugar comes from what? Sugar cane. Sugar cane grows in warmer climates, tropical climates, like Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, things like that, climates like that. And Jamaica was a colony of Great Britain after they took over Jamaica from the Spanish, because Jamaica was conquered by Christopher Columbus in 1494. Jamaica was a island, Jamaica, and then we know Hispaniola, right? And the western portion of Hispaniola is going to be Haiti. The French are going to take over Haiti. All right, they take over Saint Dominique, and then becomes Haiti and Haitian Revolution, 1791, 1803. They declared their independence January 1st, 1804. But like recently, we've heard Haiti in the news, we've heard Jamaica in the news, we've heard Cuba in the news. Those are all three islands conquered by Christopher Columbus on behalf of the Spanish crown. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. I teach another 10-week course dealing with ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So Sunday we talked about, we're in the portion of the class we dealt with the Moors losing control of Granada in Spain, January 2nd, 1492. August 3rd, 1492, the Sephardic Jews, the Sephardim, being expelled. August 2nd, 1492. August 3rd, 1492, Columbus setting sail on his first 4 voyages on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And in 1492, he's going to conquer the Bahamas. 1494, he conquers Jamaica. Okay, so we see all this evolving. Then we're going to see the British get involved. The Portuguese are the first ones involved in the transatlantic slave trade about 1441. The Spanish are right behind them. Spain and Portugal, which was the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD, when the general Tariq ibn Ziyad, the Moor, goes into, they invade the Iberian Peninsula, defeat the Vandals and the Visigoths. But we're going to see the Portuguese, the first one's involved in the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to see the Spanish, the second one's involved. England is going to come later. All right. But then for about the approximately first 200 years, the Portuguese are going to dominate the transatlantic slave trade, but England's going to take over and hijack it. We're going to see these fights between these different European nations who have been fighting each other for hundreds of years because they were barbarians and Germanic people before that. Okay. The Anglos, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Jutes, the Alans, the Picts, the Franks. These people have been fighting each other for hundreds of years before they formed themselves into nations and European powers. They were fighting and killing each other for hundreds of years before that. When the transatlantic slave trade happens, they're fighting and killing each other over these new lands that they're conquering, these new territories they're conquering also. All right. So in a period that saw Britain industrialize profits, profits could be made by exporting manufactured goods to Africa, and then further profits accrued from imported slave products such as sugar, which comes from sugar cane, which became very fashionable with the British people. Now, the British are known for drinking tea, right? And what do they put in tea? They put sugar in tea. Okay. And this was one of the criticisms I had of Meghan Markle when she married Prince Harry, May 19th, 2018, which was Queen Charlotte Sophia's birthday. And Queen Charlotte Sophia was of African Moorish ancestry on her mother's side of the family. Queen Charlotte Sophia. And it's also Malcolm X's birthday. And I said, I don't dislike Meghan Markle, but I said she's married into a family of colonizers. And I'm not calling them colonizers because they're white. I'm calling them colonizers because 100 years ago, Great Britain had colonized 1/5 of the world population. And a lot of the opulence and wealth that you saw displayed during her marriage to Prince Harry, and you know, people were all teary-eyed and saying it was a beautiful wedding and all that stuff. I said, well, you know, it was built on the backs of African slaves. A lot of that wealth that you saw displayed was built on the backs of African slaves. That's why I said she married into a family of colonizers. And then look and see what happened. We you know, whoop, there it is. You know, I tried to warn her, but you know, people saying, oh, they're in love. I said, what's love got to do with it? I'm telling you the truth. So let's continue. So the slave trade was important in the development of the wider economy, financial, commercial, legal, and insurance institutions all emerged to support the activities of the transatlantic slave trade. Some merchants became bankers, and many new businesses were financed by profits made from slave trading. The slave trade played an important role in providing British industry with access to what? Raw materials. The slave trade played an important role in providing British industry with access to raw materials. This contributed to the increased production of manufactured goods. See, the Industrial Revolution, which then caused the need for more human labor in factories, which then caused the need to organize human labor so they're protected by laws. That's precipitated by the transatlantic slave trade, and the Industrial Revolution is coming about because England and other European countries, but it starts in England, the Industrial Revolution, they have access to raw materials because of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, the graphic below shows the parts of Britain's economy that benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. Let's look at this here. So you have Industrial Revolution. See, when they teach about the Industrial Revolution, when they talk about the Industrial Revolution in school, I ain't like history when I was in school. I'm gonna be honest with you. Now, when I got to college, I was studying Dr. John Henrik Clarke and Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinin, and I was listening to conscious hip hop and Malcolm X and Minister Farrakhan, things like this. So I started really studying history in college. I ain't like history in high school because they weren't teaching it. Like when they talk about the Industrial Revolution, they didn't connect it really to slavery in African people, things like this. Okay. So we see the Industrial Revolution, London finance. We see wealth and income. Let's see, shipping, exports and manufacturing, Industrial Revolution, London and finance, wealth and income, happy white people, and enslaved Africans. All right. And then when I saw this idiotic interview that Candace Owens did with Larry Elder, Black conservative radio talk show host, Larry Elder, who doesn't have a clue. And he talked about how if we talk about giving reparations to white people, then we should give reparations to slave owners here in this country, because he said, like it or not, slavery was legal. Okay, now he didn't tell you that from 18 08 to 1860, white people were breaking the law, federal law, and bringing Africans into this country. He didn't talk about that. Then also, it is true that the British, Candace Owens didn't know this because she's a dumb as hell. The people that follow Candace are dumber than she is. That's why she wanted to debate Roland Martin, because he'd tear her behind up, like Michael Eric Dyson did on MSNBC as well. Candace Owens didn't know that Great Britain, when they abolished slavery in 1833, they paid 46,000 British slave owners reparations. They did. Here in the U.S. in 1862, the Emancipated Compensation Act of April 1862, signed by President Abraham Lincoln, paid slave owners only in Washington, D.C. They got reparations only in Washington, D.C., up to $300 per slave. That was only in Washington, D.C. But after the Civil War ends, President Andrew Johnson is going to give the confiscated land back to the plantation owners, back to the Confederacy. He's going to give the land back to them. Okay, Larry Elder didn't talk about that. You know, he's a professional white behind kisser. That's his game. Okay, I know the hustle he's running. That's his game. All right. So that's an example of how elections have consequences. Okay, because he'll be a horrible governor of California. All right, and he's against the mask mandates. Coronavirus would just be totally out of control if Larry Elder was governor of California. That's an example of how elections have consequences. Okay, let's see. Now this is the one I wanted to go to. This is the slide right here. Well, is this the one? I want to go to manufacturing, economic growth. Which slide is that? Just a second here. They have different slides you can look through. I'm not going to go through all these because I don't have time to go through all these. Okay, that's slave trade and British economy. I want which slide I want? I want the one dealing with slave trade. I want the one dealing with manufacturing. And let's see here. Okay. How's everybody doing? Let me pull this up. Also, if you all like this type of information, you want to support the African History Network, we definitely appreciate your support. $, the AHN show through Cash App. $, the AHN show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Okay. So we broadcast our radio show 6 days a week. I do a lot of research, etc. You can join us Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., and other broadcasts we do. And this helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting as well. Okay. And when you be sure that when you do it through Cash App, be sure to type in $, the AHN show, SHOW. Okay. And it'll say Michael and show my picture. And the reason why I say that is because some people set up some fake African History Network Cash App accounts, which is not me. All right. So ours is $, the AHN show. These other ones are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. I already reported on the Cash App. I don't know who did that. All right. Okay. Let me, I'm trying to find this other. I'm trying to find the right. Oh, this is, okay. It's slide number 4. This is what I want right here. They have some different slides here that you can look at. But what I want is slide number 4. Okay. Slave trade and the British economy. British profits were made from exporting manufactured goods to Africa and importing slave products such as sugar. Ports such as Glasgow, Bristol, and Liverpool prospered as a result of the slave trade. Let's scroll down. This is what I want right here. Manufacturing. This connects it to the Industrial Revolution. Economic growth and the Industrial Revolution. Economic growth and the Industrial Revolution. Now, this is from the BBC. They're telling on themselves. I appreciate them telling the truth, but dude, this isn't like in Cobra putting this information out. This isn't like the Reparations Coalition. This is the BBC that put this out. The British Broadcasting Company. They're the ones that put this out. This is from bbc.co.uk. Okay, this ain't Dr. Greg Carr. This isn't Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Professor James Small, Professor Kabahaya Kamene. This is the BBC putting this stuff out. Many historians describe the Industrial Revolution as a process rather than an event. As a process rather than an event. The part that exports played can be shown as a virtuous circle. Okay, so let's look at this here. We see business owners invest and look for better machines. Machines get better. They can produce more. They're more efficient. You know, investment in tech increases in technology, things like this, produce better machines. Machines get better. Products get cheaper. Exports grow. Industry grows. Business owners invest and look for better machines. So you have this circle. Okay, they're getting economies of scale. They're getting get more raw materials, get lower prices on raw materials. Better machines can produce faster, produce products faster, etc. They can produce more products. They can lower the price of products as well because they have a lower cost. So we see this cycle. If we look at cotton, from 1750 onwards, a new industry emerged in Britain. The production of cotton cloth. Wool cloth had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had one key advantage. Machinery could process cotton fibers better than wool. As a result, it was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began. It was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began, particularly in and around Manchester, England. Now, the cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. The growth of the Atlantic economy was an integral part of the growth of exports. The growth of the Atlantic economy was an integral part of the growth of exports. For example, manufactured cotton cloth was exported to Africa. The Atlantic economy can be seen as the spark for the biggest change in modern economic history, or we can say the transatlantic slave trade economy. The Atlantic economy in the 1700s was founded on slave labor. Okay, they're talking about the Atlantic economy, but the foundation is slavery. The Atlantic economy in the 1700s was founded on slave labor. This is a painting here of enslaved African cotton. Key features of the Industrial Revolution. Okay. Let's look at this here. Key features of the Industrial Revolution: introduction of factories, introduction of cotton, use of machines, increase in productivity, water and steam power, falling prices. Okay. Key features of the Industrial Revolution included: products were made in factories instead of at home. Workers used machines instead of working by hand. The machines were driven by water or steam power. One worker could produce much more each day. Okay, so production goes up. One worker could produce much more each day. A cotton spinner could spin 200 times as much in the year 1800 compared to the year 1700. Cotton became Britain's greatest export industry. Now, this is inside of a cotton factory and them using the machines to spin cotton. All right. So read this here. This is at bbc.co.uk. Slave trade and the British economy. Okay, you can check this out. All right. Yeah, mass production. Okay. So we see the roots of the Industrial Revolution. The labor movement is connected to the Industrial Revolution. All right. Okay, let's continue here. Let's go back to, I want to go back to the PowerPoint presentation here. All right, so we talked about that. And then we have the U.S. Civil War. Okay. So U.S. Civil War is 1861 to 1865. And when the Civil War ends, now it causes, especially white people in the South, to have to renegotiate with their, or negotiate labor with their former slaves. The Civil War in the United States began in 1861, and after decades of simmering tensions between northern and southern states over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 caused 7 southern states to secede and form the Confederate States of America. So South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union December 20th, 1860. And the Civil War is going to break out April 12th, 1861 in South Carolina also. 4 more states soon joined. So it's going to be 11 states that form the Confederate States of America. The war between the states, as the Civil War was also known, ended in Confederate surrender in 1865. The conflict was the costliest and deadliest war ever fought on American soil, with some 620,000 of 2.5 million soldiers killed. Okay, 620,000 soldiers died in the U.S. Civil War. Millions more were injured, and much of the South was left in ruin. You can read more information. History.com has a really good section there dealing with the American Civil War. Now, we look at the Reconstruction Era, 1865 to 1877. Okay. For a 14-year period, the U.S. government took steps to integrate the nation's newly freed African-American population into society. And let's see here. Okay. Between 1863 and 1877, the U.S. government undertook the task of integrating nearly 4 million formerly enslaved Africans into society after the Civil War bitterly divided the country over the issue of slavery. A white slave-holding South that had built its economy and culture on slave labor was now forced by its defeat in the Civil War to change its economic, political, and social relations with African Americans. Okay, now, what we're going to see is that even though labor unions, we start seeing labor unions pop up in about the 1830s, we're going to see a lot of labor unions formed after slavery ends. And they're trying to protect jobs for white men and white immigrants that are here, and trying to lock out African Americans out of these jobs. All right. So after the Civil War ends, you're going to have a lot of your large labor unions founded. The National Labor Union was founded in 1866. Other labor unions, like the American Federation of Labor with Samuel Gompers, are founded after slavery ends. They were founded around in the 1870s. American Federation of Labor. It was the enslaved Africans who had the majority of the skills in this country. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and we were largely working for free. Okay, now, if we look at this slide here, this comes from the book The Other Slaves, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen, from 1978, James Newton and Ronald Lewis. They list at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts in that book that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. We did more than just pick cotton. Now, at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History here in Detroit, when you go through there, when you go through their main exhibit called "And Still We Rise," and then you go through that exhibit and you come out on the other side, and they take you through out history, and they take you through like the 1800s, and you see Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, things like this. There's a big display on the wall that lists 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Okay. And what happened was I saw it and they weren't numbered. Okay. I saw it and there's a sign there that says you can't take pictures. So I went home and got a pen and pad, and I went back and I spent an hour writing them down. And I numbered them. That's how I know it's 262. Because I went back, I spent an hour writing them down, and then they weren't numbered on the display. I went through and I numbered them, and it came up to 262. So that's where I get 262 from. Okay, so we were the engineers, we were the barrel makers, we had all these skills. Now, a lot of these skill sets we're going to bring with us from Africa, and some we're going to learn here. We were carpenters, all different types of things like this. All right. So we had the skills, and our skills were as good as many white people, in many cases better. We were anchor makers, artists, bakers, barrel makers, bartenders, basket makers, beer makers, blacksmiths, bricklayers, brick makers, cabinet makers, cigar makers, cooks, coppersmiths, decorative furnishers, fishermen, engineers, gardeners, hemp baggers, herb doctors, horse trainers, hunters, locksmiths. This is just a few. So what's going to happen is that after slavery ends, we're going to largely get pushed out of these jobs, because now we can compete for wages, and the Freedmen's Bureau is helping us compete for wages and negotiate labor contracts. The Freedmen's Bureau. So let me see here. I want to refer to my notes for this part here. All right, so there are at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and we were largely working for free. After slavery ends, we're going to see a lot of these labor unions created, and they were created to protect jobs for white men, to keep African Americans out of these unions, and they're going to have contracts with various industries and tell them you can only hire white men that belong to these unions. All right. Then from about 1866 to 1880, we're going to see about 12 million European immigrants coming to this country. And a lot of these jobs that they got should have gone to African Americans who were already here doing the work. But the other thing that we're going to see is that when these European immigrants get these jobs in these factories, and white people who are already here in these factories, we're going to see their labor largely exploited as well. They're going to be paid very low wages. They're going to work in unsanitary conditions. Okay, so this is an important piece of history to look at as well. And we're going to see this labor movement take form, fighting for better wages, fighting for safer conditions, fighting for 8-hour work days, etc. Now, I'm not against labor unions. Understand the history of labor unions and how we were discriminated against. I'm not against labor unions. I'm against discrimination in labor unions. I'm against racism in labor unions. I'm against African Americans being discriminated, as well as other people. I'm against that in labor unions. Labor unions have their purpose when they work correctly, and they're not discriminated against people because of race, ethnicity, things like this. So I'm not against labor unions. I'm against white supremacy and racism in labor unions. You can read For more information, read the book How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy from this read that book, third edition. Okay, third edition. Let's see here. All right. So if you look at the labor union movement of the late 1800s, and they talk about this in the book How White Folks Got So Rich, the story of American white supremacy. The labor union movement of the late 1800s has arguably done more to destroy African American progress than any other known action of white people, I would say, after slavery. Yet it is almost totally invisible in African American history. It's almost totally invisible in African American history. The union movement was specifically designed to, one, remove African Americans from their jobs in the skilled trades, and we dominated the skilled trades. Two, install in those jobs the European immigrants who were flooding into America by the millions. Scholars attribute the rapid success of immigrant groups directly to the advantages they received through their memberships in the American trade unions. Okay, read pages 37 to 38 of How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. All right. Now, I'm against racism and discrimination. I'm against anybody being mistreated. Okay. So I'm not saying, well, it's all right to mistreat them, just don't mistreat us, because we're all being manipulated by the same elite. We're all being manipulated by the same 1% or 2%, what have you. All right. So I'm against racism and white supremacy. I'm against all of that, especially in labor unions. Okay, let's continue here. All right, now, this is George Pullman, founder of the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago in 1867. We'll come to George Pullman in just a second here. Because we see Labor Day becoming a national holiday during the Pullman Car Company strike. All right, 1894. Now, when we look at the origins of Labor Day, okay, so when we look at the origins of Labor Day, and we look at the early history of labor unions, we're going to find that you're going to have a rise in labor unions when you have the Industrial Revolution, and it's okay. Okay, I'm looking at my notes here. Let me skip over that. Now, many of these events that we see regarding labor and labor strikes are going to turn violent during the late 1800s. All right, in this country, and you're going to include things like the infamous Haymarket riot of 1886, in which several Chicago policemen and workers were killed. Others gave rise, other labor strikes and things like this gave rise to long-standing traditions. On September 5th, 1882, 10,000 workers took unpaid time off to march from City Hall to Union Square in New York City, holding the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history. Okay, September 5th, 1882, 10,000 workers march from City Hall to Union Square in New York City. The idea of a working man's holiday, celebrated on the first Monday in September, caught on in other industrial centers across the country, and many states passed legislation recognizing it. Congress would not legalize the holiday until 12 years later in 1894, when a watershed moment in American labor history brought workers' rights squarely into the public view. And this deals with the Pullman strike and George Pullman in Chicago. Okay, let's see here. So on May 11th, 1894, employees of the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago went on strike to protest wage cuts and the firing of union representatives. The Pullman Palace Car Company was named after George Pullman. So the Pullman Palace Car Company was named after George Pullman. And the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago, the workers are going to go on strike to protest wage cuts and the firing of union representatives. And this was during an economic downturn, okay, that starts in 1893. And because of this economic downturn in 1893, George Pullman had to cut wages of his workers by 25%, and he cut union representation as well. This is going to cause a backlash, okay, amongst his workers. Now, African Americans who were basically Pullman porters on the Pullman cars on railroads, African Americans were not allowed to join the white union, and they were not allowed to strike, okay, because they were not allowed to join the white union. They also had, and the African American Pullman porters had another set of grievances which dealt with the mistreatment that they suffered and racism, okay? So we're going to see the Pullman Palace Car Company, those white workers are going to go on strike May 11th, 1894. And this is going to begin unrest in the Illinois town that George Pullman founded called Pullman, Illinois. Pullman, Illinois. All right. He founded a town. He founded a bank in that town. And a lot of his workers lived in the town that he founded, and they lived in property in houses that he owned. Okay. George Pullman. Okay. This, man, I was researching about George Pullman a few years ago. I'm like, it just blew my mind. Okay. Now, George Pullman was born in 1831 in upstate New York to the son of a carpenter. He learned carpentry himself and moved to Chicago, Illinois in the late 1850s. All right. During the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, George Pullman began building a new kind of railroad passenger car. Okay, during the Civil War, he began building a new kind of railroad passenger car, which had berths for passengers to sleep. Pullman's cars became popular with the railroads, and in 1867, he formed the Pullman Palace Car Company. Okay, the Pullman Palace Car Company in 1867. Now, he was the creator of the railroad sleeping car, and the town that he founded, Pullman, Illinois, was just outside of Chicago. And this town had been built as a utopian home for George Pullman's workers. But the utopia was designed to serve George Pullman above all others. Okay. And that was reported by PBS, Public Broadcasting System. They have information there on George Pullman and the Pullman porters. Now, PBS notes its residents all worked for the Pullman Company. Their paychecks drawn from Pullman Bank and their rent sent to George Pullman deducted automatically from their weekly paychecks. So what's going to happen is that because of the downturn in the economy in 1893, George Pullman had to cut back on wages, but he didn't cut back on the rent he was charging people. Now, from 1880 to 1893, all seemed well in Pullman town until an economic depression prompted George Pullman to cut wages, even though their rents remained the same. The workers walked out. In solidarity, members of the American Railway Union, founded by fiery socialist Eugene Debs, took up the cause, and its 150,000 members of the American Railway Union refused to work on trains carrying Pullman sleeping cars. This prompted a nationwide transportation nightmare. So you're going to have George Pullman, who cuts wages, doesn't cut rent. Despite growing tensions among his workers, George Pullman's vision of a paternalistic community organized around a factory fascinated the American public for a time. When Chicago hosted the Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair of 1893, international visitors flocked to see the model. They flocked to see the model town created by George Pullman. Things changed dramatically with the Panic of 1893. The Panic of 1893 was a severe financial depression that affected the American economy. George Pullman cut the wages of workers by 1/3, but he refused to lower the rents in the company housing. But he cut wages by 1/3. So the depression set off by the pandemic of 1893 was the greatest depression America had known at the time, and was only surpassed by the Great Depression of the 1930s. In early May 1893, the New York stock market dropped sharply, and in late June 1893, panic selling caused the stock market to crash. A severe credit crisis resulted, and more than 16,000 businesses had failed by the end of 1893. More than 16,000 businesses in the U.S. had failed by the end of 1893. Included in the failed businesses were 156 railroads and nearly 500 banks. This is the Panic of 1893. The following year, Pullman workers are going to go on strike. Now, unemployment spread until 1 in 6 American men lost their jobs. Thought.com has a really good article dealing with the financial panics of the 19th century, and they deal with the Panic of 1893. Now let's continue here. Now, this is Eugene V. Debs, and I'm halfway through my notes. This is Eugene V. Debs, president of the American Railway Union. He became president in 1893. Now, let me go back to my notes here. So he cuts wages. So orders for railroad sleeping cars declined, and George Pullman was forced to lay off hundreds of employees. This is because of the Panic of 1893. Those employees who remained endured wage cuts, even while rents in Pullman properties remained consistent. take-home paychecks plummeted. And so the employees walked out, demanding lower rents and higher pay. The American Railway Union, led by a young Eugene V. Debs, came to the cause of the striking workers, and railroad workers across the nation boycotted trains carrying Pullman cars. Rioting, pillaging, and burning of railroad cars soon ensued. Mobs of non-union workers are going to join in. In response, the American Railway Union, which was the largest American union at the time, with 150,000 members, the American Railway Union members are going to take action. The local branches of the union called for a strike at the Pullman Palace Car Company complex on May 11th, 1894. Newspaper reports said the company was surprised by the men walking out. Now, the Pullman strike is going to spread nationwide, okay? And Eugene V. Debs was the president of the American Railway Union, all right? That's going to join in solidarity with the Pullman Palace Car Company white employees, not the African-American employees, the white employees. Now, outraged by the strike at his factory, George Pullman closed the plant, determined to wait out the workers. George Pullman's stubborn strategy might have worked, except the American Railway Union members called on the national membership to get involved. The union's national convention voted to refuse to work on any train in the country that had a Pullman car, which brought the nation's passenger rail service to a standstill. George Pullman had no power to crush a strike which had suddenly spread far and wide. The American Railway Union managed to get about 260,000 workers nationwide to join in this boycott, in this labor strike. At times, Eugene V. Debs, the leader of the American Railway Union, was portrayed by the press, by the newspapers, as a dangerous radical leading an insurrection against the American way of life, because he was a socialist also. Now, the strike instantly became a national issue. And let's see here. Let's change this. Okay. So the strike soon became a national issue. President Grover Cleveland, faced with nervous railroad executives and interrupted mail trains because the mail couldn't get delivered like it was supposed to, okay, because of the strike. President Grover Cleveland declared the strike a federal crime and deployed 12,000 U.S. troops to break the strike. Violence erupted, and 2 men were killed when U.S. deputy marshals fired on protesters in Kensington, Illinois, near Chicago. But the strike was doomed. On June 26, 1894, the American Railroad Union, led by Eugene V. Debs, called for a boycott of all Pullman rail cars, crippling railroad traffic nationwide. To break the Pullman strike, the federal government dispatched troops to Chicago, unleashing a wave of riots that resulted in the deaths of more than a dozen workers. So in the wake of this massive unrest, and in an attempt to repair ties with American workers, Congress passed an act making Labor Day a legal holiday in the District of Columbia and the territories. On June 28, 1894, President Grover Cleveland signed this bill into law. More than a century later, the true founder of Labor Day has yet to be identified. So this comes about, the Labor Day being a national holiday, comes about as a way for especially President Grover Cleveland to try to mend ties with the labor movement. Let me see, go here. Okay, we got this. Okay. So he's trying to mend ties with the labor union, the labor movement. Now, some people credit Peter J. McGuire, co-founder of the American Federation of Labor, as being the founder of Labor Day, while others have suggested that Matthew McGuire, a secretary of the Central Labor Union, first proposed the holiday. Now, in an article from the Atlantic.com, they said that it was America's first true nationwide strike and a major milestone for the labor movement, but it did not end well for anyone. President Grover Cleveland, under pressure from the railroad industry and the U.S. Postal Service, because the U.S. Postal Service transported their mail on the railroad cars on trains. The U.S. Postal Service pleaded with him to get involved in the strike. So he declared the strike a federal crime and is going to send the union sending the troops to end the strike. Okay. According to the Atlantic, America's first true nationwide strike and a major milestone for the labor movement. Okay. While the strike came to an abrupt end, George Pullman's employees promised never again to unionize. President Grover Cleveland's popularity suffered, especially among the labor movement's working class core. Making Labor Day a national holiday was the president's election year attempt at an olive branch, as reported by PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System. Although it did not succeed in winning him another term in office. Over time, however, as tensions eased between unions and the establishment, the holiday came to have less to do with labor leaders than with retail figures. So over the years, the significance of Labor Day and its origins have largely been forgotten, and it's been more commercialized and focused on Labor Day sales at retailers and cookouts and vacations and things like this. There's an article from Time magazine called "How a Bloody Railroad Strike Paved the Way for the First Labor Day." How a bloody railroad strike paved the way for the first Labor Day. That's from Time magazine, time.com. Let's see here. Now, when we look at Pullman porters, and these are largely African Americans who are going to service people on George Pullman sleeping cars. In their home neighborhoods, to be a Pullman porter was considered to be a prestigious position. The job offered a steady income and an opportunity to travel across America, and a life largely free of heavy physical labor, rare for African Americans in that era. Historian Mule Black recounted that, quote, they were good looking, in reference to the Pullman porters. They were good looking, clean, and immaculate in their dress. Their style was quite manly. Their language was very carefully crafted so that they had a sense of intelligence about them. They were good role models for young men, end quote. Now, the Pullman porters were also mistreated. And this was one of their grievances, but they couldn't strike back in 1894 because they weren't allowed to join the union then. They were overworked and subjected to countless indignities on the job. So we see that the Pullman porters are going to organize in 1925, and the first president is going to be A. Phillip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Okay. Let me see. Let me pull this. We can pull this up here. Just a second. There's another picture. Okay, here we go. And there's some famous pictures of Pullman porters in their uniforms that you can see online also. All right, let's continue here. Um, so the Pullman porters were mistreated, underpaid, and overworked and subjected to countless indignities on the job. Quote, a Pullman porter was really kind of a glorified hotel maid and bellhop in what George Pullman called a hotel on wheels, end quote, explains former Pullman porter and historian Greg Leroy. The Pullman company just thought of the porters as a piece of equipment, just like another button on a panel, the same as a light switch on a fan or a fan switch, he said. Now, George Pullman demanded 400 hours a month or 11,000 miles, sometimes as much as 20 hours a stretch from his Pullman porters, and he paid ridiculously low wages. In 1926, an average of $810 per year. In 1926, an average of $810 per year, which is about $7,500 in today's economy. Quote, it did not pay a livable wage, but they made a living with the tips they got because the salary was nothing, says Lynn Hughes of the A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum. The company expected its employees to pay for their own meals, supply their own uniforms and shoe polish, and allowed them only short naps on couches in the smoking car. Disgruntled Pullman porters began to question their situation and decided to take on the enormously powerful company. Okay, stand by, I'll be right back. All right, we're back. Let's continue. Okay, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in as well. How y'all like this type of information? If you like this type of information, you can register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays. We have a new session of this online course starting up Saturday. It's going to be September 11th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. This is a 10-week online course that I teach. We deal with a little more than 100 years of history. We deal with history after, starting with the last year of the Civil War. And we go throughout history. Each class we go through and analyze an approximately 10-year period of history to see what happened to us after slavery ends, the laws and policies put in place to put us in the predicament that we're in right now. Okay, and so we better understand where do we go from here. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have a few of the slides that I'm showing here are from the actual class. We'll do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips, a ton of information. And we go through and analyze approximately a 10-year period of history each class. We do the classes live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch them over and over again. Okay. And the class is regularly $130. It's on sale $80. As soon as you register, there's bonus content that you can start watching. And you'll also get in digital download format, you'll get some bonus lectures from me. Uh, one that I did dealing with the history of Juneteenth. It's a 2.5-hour lecture I did dealing with the history of Juneteenth. We did this June 2016 and 2019. So you get this one here. This one here is the latest one. Did this June 16th, 2021. It's a 2.5-hour lecture. Also, you'll get this bundle pack here, Black Migration 1619 to 2019. That's a $60 value. So it's really close to $200 value you get on sale for $80. Okay. And it has 6 of my lectures, Black Migration 1619 to 2019. Also, you get this one here dealing with when black men dominated horse racing, and we were winning the Kentucky Derbies and got pushed out of horse racing. So you get all that. So just click on register here. We go back up here, click on register here. It takes you to the next page, and just click on enroll. And as soon as you register, you can start watching content. You can join us in class Saturday, September 11th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. So even if you miss class, you can go back and watch it whenever you want to. That's fine. Even after the 10-week course is over with, you still have access to the class. You can still watch it. There's another 10-week online course that I teach. This deals with thousands of years of history leading up to the transatlantic slave trade. This is ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we have a new session starting up on, this is going to be Sunday, September 12th. This is going to be 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, we'll start with class number 1. All right, so you can register for that one as well. All right, let's continue here. If you'd like this type of information, also you can support us. $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And we have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com also. Okay, let's continue here. Let's see here. We'll go back to this. Okay, Pullman Porters. Let's pull this back up. All right, let's continue. I have to go back to my notes. Okay, so in 1926, an average Pullman porter earned $810 a year. That's about $7,500 in today's economy. Now, the company expected its employees to pay for their own meals, supply their own uniforms and shoe polish, and allowed them only to take short naps on couches in the smoking car. Disgruntled Pullman porters began to question their situation and decided to take on the enormously powerful company. In 1925, the Pullman porters formed a union called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And their president was Phillip Randolph, Asa Phillip Randolph. Now, this marked the founding of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1925, marked the beginning of a 12-year struggle for dignity between working conditions and fair pay. Its leader, the charismatic African-American activist A. Phillip Randolph, and former porter Milton Webster, head of the Chicago Union Local, uh, their eventual triumph marked the first time in American history that an African-American union forced a powerful corporation to the negotiating table. It was a significant step forward for African-American equality. Now, the union, now we've had some steps back. We had a lot of steps that pushed us back also. The union members learned how to organize and negotiate. Because see, we see the seeds of the modern day civil rights movement in the formation of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1925 in their 12-year fight against George Pullman. Right, the union members learned how to organize and how to negotiate. Okay, they learned how to organize and how to negotiate. And let's see, we'll come back to that in just a second here. We'll go to that in just a second. They discovered that even in a time of great prejudice in America, African Americans could effect change if they stood together and persevered. They would later apply their techniques to the modern day civil rights movement. We know that A. Phillip Randolph is going to become instrumental in the civil rights movement, and he was looked at as one of the big six Negro leaders. Also, so the union members of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters are going to take these skills that they learned and use them in the civil rights movement to help African Americans in general. All right, let's see here. Okay, let's look at this here. Britannica.com has some information on Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Blackpast.org does also, but this is a quick excerpt from Britannica.com. Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, also called Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Maids, was the first African-American labor union to be affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. Founded in 1925 by labor organizer and civil rights activist A. Phillip Randolph, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters aimed to improve the working conditions and treatment of African-American railroad porters and maids employed by the Pullman Company, George Pullman's company, a manufacturer and operator of railroad cars. The BSCP embodied A. Phillip Randolph's belief that segregation and racism were linked to the unfair distribution of wealth and power that condemned tens of millions of African Americans and white Americans to chronic misery. So check this out at Britannica.com. Okay, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Now, let's see here. And this is, we talked about this. This is information here from blackpast.org. Blackpast.org has a section. They have an article on the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters also. Talks about the mistreatment of them as well, and the strike that they went on and why they went on strike. All right, now let me look at my notes here. TheRoot.com has an article from they had an article in a video clip from September 4th, 2017, TheRoot.com, called America's Racist History of Labor. America's Racist History of Labor. Now, the seeds of the civil rights movement, we see go back to 1925, in the 1925 to 1930s. And Black Pullman porters were not allowed to participate in the Pullman strike of 1894, led by the American Railway Union. Let me see here. Some associate African American unions, some associate African American unions with A. Phillip, Randolph, and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was established in 1925. But some scholars date African American unions to as early as 1838. In 1869, there was the Colored National Labor Union, which was established by a ship caulker named Isaac Myers. Okay. And he's going to become president of the Colored National Labor Union in 1869. Though the Colored National Labor Union was short-lived, it paved the way for African American labor unions to come. Now, Isaac Myers was a labor leader, a Mason, and was born in Baltimore on January 13th, 1835. So he was the son of free parents, but grew up in a slave state, okay, of Maryland. Isaac Myers received his early education from a private day school of a local clergyman named Reverend John Fortie, Fortie, since the state of Maryland provided no public education for African American children at the time. At age 16, he became an apprentice to James Jackson, a prominent African American Baltimore ship caulker. 4 years later, Isaac Myers was supervising the caulking of clipper ships operating out of Baltimore, Maryland. During the U.S. Civil War, Isaac Myers worked as a porter and shipping clerk for a grocery store owner, and then returned to his original profession as a caulker. Soon after the war ended, Isaac Myers found himself unexpectedly unemployed when a group of white caulkers protested the employment of African American caulkers and longshoremen. In response to the strike, Isaac Myers proposed the creation of a union of African American caulkers. We're going to see a lot of race riots that take place throughout history are going to surround employment. And it's going to surround white people, white men being upset that African Americans are being hired, okay, being hired on their jobs, being hired at their company. And this is going to cause racial tensions. All right. Here we see these white workers who are protesting the employment of African American workers and longshoremen. All right. And this is after the Civil War ends, and this is the time where you're going to see a lot of these national labor unions pop up to protect jobs for white men and lock African Americans out of these jobs. Now, in response to the strike, Isaac Myers proposed the creation of a union for African American caulkers. And this is a piece here from blackpast.org. Okay. Let me see something here. Okay. This is a piece from blackpast.org. Let's flip over to that for a second here. This is an important piece of history. And then Frederick Douglass is going to become a president of the Colored National Labor Union as well. Let me pull this up so you can see it here. I have it in my notes, but I want to show this to you. So this is from blackpast.org, and it deals with Isaac Myers. So the newly created the newly created union, the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society, decided to form a cooperative company that would own a shipyard and railroad. Okay, a shipyard and railroad. Now, the co-ops is basically was the key to economic prosperity for African Americans. During slavery, after slavery ended, the co-ops, all right. And if you read this book here by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhard, Collective Courage, I interviewed her back in about 2014. Collective Courage deals with the history of African American co-ops. That was the key to economic empowerment for African Americans historically. Okay, it wasn't investing in the stock market. It wasn't copying white business principles. The cooperatives were concepts that we brought with us from West Africa, and it focused on the collective. And the members of these co-ops were also owners. One of the most famous types of co-ops is a credit union. But we had co-ops like the Colored Merchants Association, created in 1928, the Colored Farmers Union, created about 1886. It grew to about 1.2 million members. It was founded in Texas, only lasted about 5 years because these co-ops were so successful that white people became jealous of our economic advances that we were making. Now, everybody, we still had a lot of poor African Americans, but they became jealous of our economic advances with these co-ops, and we were getting threats, we were getting killed, etc. So we had to disband them just to save ourselves. Okay, a lot of those co-ops are going to be disbanded. So some are not, but a lot of those co-ops, like the Colored Farmers Union, they're going to have to disband because of the threats they were getting from white people, from white domestic terrorists. So pooling their resources, this is something that the co-ops did, okay? Pooling their resources, the workers issued stock and quickly raised $10,000 in subscriptions among African-American Baltimore residents. They also borrowed another $30,000. And on February 12, 1866, this is the year after slavery ends, the year after the Civil War ends. February 12, 1866, they purchased a shipyard and railway, which they named the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. The Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. Within months, the cooperative employed 300 African-American caulkers and received several government contracts. Ultimately, it employed a number of white workers as well. The success of Isaac Meyer's union in Baltimore, Maryland, encouraged African-American caulkers in other seaport cities to organize. It also caught the attention of the National Labor Union Executive Committee, then the largest labor organization in the nation. Now, the National Labor Union, they go back to 1866. They're created right after slavery ends, and they're locking African Americans out of a lot of these jobs. In 1869, the National Labor Union invited Isaac Meyer's Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society to its national convention meeting in Philadelphia, 1869. The National Labor Union declared it would welcome African-American unions to its federation. Meanwhile, Isaac Myers was elected president of the Colored National Labor Union, the first organization of its type in U.S. history. Isaac Myers appealed to African-American workers to join unions and called on white unions to accept them as full members. Accepting the full support of the National Labor Union, he soon learned that the predominantly white organization insisted that black union members abandon the Republican Party and join the Labor Reform Party. Okay, now this is during Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. Like 95% of African Americans are Republicans because that was the party of Lincoln. Okay. Expecting the full support of the National Labor Union, Isaac Myers soon learned that the predominantly white organization insisted that African-American union members abandon the Republican Party and join the Labor Reform Party. It's also the party of Frederick Douglass, because Douglass doesn't die till 1895. So Douglass is still alive here. Okay. When the African American Union members, led by Isaac Myers, refused to abandon the Republican Party, the GOP. Now they get the hell out today, but back then they were something. They were not invited back to the National Labor Union. With no allies among the large labor movement, the colored National Labor Union soon found itself isolated. It collapsed in 1870. It collapsed by 1871. Now, let's put this back up here. All right. Now, Isaac Myers held a variety of other positions, but his years of prominence were over. He's going to hold a number of other positions, but his years of prominence are over. He worked as a detective for the Baltimore Post Office between 1872 and 1879. Between 1879 and 1882, he operated a small Baltimore coal yard. For the next 5 years, he worked as a U.S. government revenue officer who inspected goods for customs duty. Isaac Myers also organized and became president of the Maryland Colored State Industrial Fair Association, the Maryland Colored State Industrial Fair Association, the Colored Businessmen's Association of Baltimore, the Colored Building and Loan Association, and the Aged Minister's Home of the AME Church. He also authored the Mason's Digest. Now, Isaac Myers married twice and had several sons, one of whom became a leading political figure in Ohio. Isaac Myers passed away in Baltimore in 1891. Okay. Passed away in Baltimore in 1891. And hold on just a second here. All right. Now we're also going to see that Frederick Douglass is going to become president of the Colored National Labor Union. He becomes president in 1872. Okay. I mean, sorry. There's a labor union. Let me see. Let me back up. Let's go here. There was some additional information on Douglass, but I didn't get it in here. There is a let me pull this up here. This will be the last thing, I hope. We'll see. How's everybody doing? I'm almost done. This is a lot of work. It took me longer to put all this stuff together than it did for me to. Most of my notes I had going back to 2018 and everything, but I updated it today and put together this PowerPoint presentation. So just bear with me. I'm almost done. Hold on. There's some information I had on Frederick Douglass right here. So I want to make sure I skip over this, because when you study Frederick Douglass' life, it's like, man, when did he sleep? All right, hold on. He became president of the Colored National, 1872. Okay. If we look at this piece here, this is from exhibitions lib.umd.edu. This is from University of Maryland. University of Maryland. And this deals with African Americans' rights. A house divided African American workers struggled against segregation. and they talk about Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, in 1872, Douglass was elected president of the Colored National Labor Union, and the publication he edited, the New National Era, became the union's official newspaper. Okay. Colored National Labor Union, and let me check one other thing here. So I think it's still going to be in existence after the collapse in 1871. There was also a good piece from newsone.com as well. Hold on. Let me see something here. There's also a piece from newsone.com today dealing with significant African American figures in the labor movement. Oh yeah, and there's also a piece from archives.gov that I saw as well. Okay. Lastly, this piece here from newsone.com is something you can check out. Douglass also helped to organize the American League of Colored Laborers as well, ALCL. Because I remember dealing with that, but I remember talking about that before. There's a piece from blackpast.org that deals with the American League of Colored Laborers. This piece here. There's a piece from blackpast.org that deals with the American League of Colored Laborers also. And it deals with Frederick Douglass helped organize the union in response to the difficulty of black laborers had in joining white unions. On June 13th, 1850, the organization assembled for its inaugural meeting in the lecture room of Zion's Church. Okay, that's 1850. That one is the American League of Colored Laborers. All right, now lastly, there is a good article from newsone.com you can check out. I was reading it earlier today. This deals with five black-led labor unions that have paved the way for black workers. Okay, five black-led labor unions that have paved the way for black workers. Okay, so check this out also at news1.com. And they go through and they deal with Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, number one. They talk about the Colored National Labor Union. All right. Colored National Labor Union in 1869, Isaac Myers. And among the goals of the Colored National Labor Union, which represented African Americans in 21 states, was the issuance of farmland to poor African Americans in the South, government aid for education, and a new non-discriminatory legislation that would help struggling African American workers. Okay. You have the National Domestic Workers Union as well, founded by Dorothy Lee Bolden in 1968. The National Domestic Workers Union of America allowed domestic workers to fight for better wages. An organizer in the civil rights movement and advocate for women's rights, Dorothy Lee Bolden was inspired by her own plight as a domestic worker. Then you have the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. This was a nonprofit organization of African American trade union members. It was established in 1972. Okay, this group is also an official member of the AFL-CIO, one of the United States' largest federation unions. Then you have the American League of Colored Laborers. The American League of Colored Laborers. Some historians believe that the American League of Colored. Some historians believe. Some historians believe that the American League of Colored Laborers is the some historians believe that the American League of Colored Laborers was the first African American labor union to form. Led by Frederick Douglass, the AALU was created in 1850 to help skilled free craftsmen hone their abilities in the agricultural and industrial industry. It also aimed to encourage African Americans to establish their own businesses. The African American labor, the American League of Colored Labor, the American League of Colored Labor, often acted as a liaison between African American workers who encountered difficulty negotiating fair labor contracts with white workers and labor unions. Okay, so check this out here. This is from news1.com. 5 Black-led labor unions that have paved the way for Black workers' rights. This is from September 4th, 2021 by Shannon Dawson. Okay, so we'll post that link here. You can read that. All right, so hopefully you learned something today and learn more about the African American roots of Labor Day and the African roots of Labor Day as well, going back to enslaved Africans in the Industrial Revolution, things like that. Be sure to register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays. Be sure to register for the 10-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement of Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And it's a 10-week online course. Each class we go through and look at approximately a 10-year period of history and what happened after slavery ended. Click on register here. It takes you to the next page. Just click on enroll, and we'll post a link here. You can register for it. It's regularly $130, on sale $80. There's bonus lectures that you get from me also with this. So it's about a $200 value you get for $80. We do the classes live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch them over and over again. And you still have access to the class even like next year. Okay, so even after the class is over with, you can go back and watch it anytime. The other class that I teach, we deal with thousands of years of history. So this class here starts up, we have a new class starting up Saturday, September 11th. Saturday, September 11th. 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, class number 1. The other class I teach is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And this class here, we deal with thousands of years of history, and we deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And you can register for that one as well. That one starts up, that'll be Sunday, September 12th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All of my DVD lectures and digital downloads, etc., are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have bundle packs of my lectures and other things. We have digital downloads. We have lectures, documentaries, etc. Okay. That's all available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have a current promotion going on right now. It's going on for a few days. It's running till Friday. We have a current promotion. Get 20% off of orders of $100 or more. Now, this does not include classes, online classes. They're already discounted, but you get 20% off of orders of $100 or more. Use promo code 8HN20 off 2021. 8HN20 off 2021. Get 20% off orders of $100 or more. All right, that's for a limited time only. Okay, so do me a favor, follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Give this video a thumbs up. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on live notifications so you know when we go live. Register for the online classes as well. There are 2 online courses that I teach. Register for those. You can use these with your children also. You can use these classes with your children. I would say that they are PG-13. Okay. I would say they're PG-13. I don't do a whole lot of cursing and a whole lot of craziness in there. I'm not, people know me. I'm not into all that. Okay. I let the information speak for itself. We use a lot of books and things like that in the class. You don't have to buy any of these books. There's a ton of articles that I use. So there are a lot of free resources you can use also. This is one of the things I refer to in the class. This study by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And where is it? Hold on, I have a bunch of books next to me. Teaching Hard History, American Slavery by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. I taught a class yesterday and class the day before. I don't know where my stuff is. Hold on. We got this. I'll show you a couple books in the class. In Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. This is one of the books we use. Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism by Dr. John Henrik Clark. If I go through this stuff, I'll find I'll find what I'm looking for. These are 2 books we use in Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe, from my friend Renoko Rashidi. We know Renoko just passed away August 2nd, 2021. He was doing a tour in Egypt, and I've interviewed Renoko a number of times. Renoko just passed away. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. This is one of the books we use. You don't have to buy any of these books. I just use them as reference. If you have them on your shelf, you can take them off, dust them off, what have you. Martin Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare by James H. Cone. This documents how the ideologies between Dr. King and Malcolm X were converging toward the end of both of their lives. Their ideologies were converging toward the end of both of their lives. So we have that. We've got, I use this in both classes. Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. Okay. Excellent book. This is the 6th edition. It's falling apart. I use this in both classes. Also, African People in World History by Dr. John Henrik Clark, African People in World History. We use this in Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Also, in Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, I use Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, which deals with how the layout of Washington, D.C. is a copy of Ancient Kemet, Ancient Egypt. We use that. Also use Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. This is another one that we use here, Hidden Truths. This is by the Banneker City Cultural Circle. It's a resource guide to the documentary Hidden Colors 2. Fantastic book, Hidden Truths. Is really a study guide for it because it goes through in everything they talk about in Hidden Colors 2, dealing with history, all the references they make. They have a short write-up on it here, and they explain what it is, and then they have other resources for you to do more research. Okay, so for example, they talk about let's just pick anything. Let's see here. They talk about did the Dogon descend from the sixth Nile Valley migration? Okay, this is on page 26. And they go through and explain the Dogon. They reference Dr. Charles Finch. Give more resources. Page 32, is there any evidence of an African influence in pyramids found in China and Japan? All right, so they go through and reference Dr. Shankout the Jope and go through, break this down. Okay, so this is a good resource. So this parts in here that we use, and the study I'm trying to find. Oh, is this it? No, that's not it. Oh, here it is. I was going through putting stuff together, putting content together, just putting things together in my binders for my classes. And so this is one that we use here, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. You can download this right now, and every school in the country should use this. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. This is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. This study documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. They did a survey of 1,000 high school students and 1,700 social studies teachers. And it goes through and documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And it makes numerous recommendations on how to more correctly teach that history. Okay. Teaching Hard History American Slavery is at the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLcenter.org. Let's see if we have it here. Okay. I have it in one of my other presentations here. We'll pull this up on the screen so it's easier to see it. You can download this study. It's like a 56-page study. Share this with your teachers and your children's schools and principals, things like this. School board, anybody here on a school board, this is a resource that you all can use. And one of the things they tell you don't do is don't do slave reenactments in class. One of the things they tell you don't do is don't do slave reenactments because it traumatizes students. For one reason, it traumatizes students. Let me pull this up here. Yeah, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. And I first found out about this study in 2018, February 1st, 2018, first day of African American History Month. That's how I found out about this study. There was an article from theatlantic.com. This is one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Dr. J teaches us whoever controls the images controls your self-esteem, self-respect, and self-development. Whoever controls the history controls the vision. Okay. And when Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small teach, Professor James Small is another one of my teachers. So many of you have heard the numerous interviews I've done with them. They talk about the pyramid principle. This is the pyramid of Khafre at Giza. The foundation of a pyramid, our foundation is African history and culture. This gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. This gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. This gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through. The other two sides of the pyramid are economic empowerment and political empowerment. We have to have a synthesis of all of this. It's not just speaking metal netter and playing a djembe and wearing African garb. We have to have African history and culture, but we also have to have economic empowerment and political empowerment. We need all three. It's not just one. We need all three. It's not just we're just going to do economic empowerment and have businesses, but we still have a white colonized mind, and we're using white business principles in the African American community. Because when we study the co-ops, the cooperatives, these were African principles that we use. Those were principles we brought with us from West Africa, largely from West Africa. And we were using them in our communities, and they were successful. This is why we were being attacked. This is why the co-ops were being attacked. Okay, now there's do I have the rest of that? Okay, this right here. What are kids really learning about slavery? This is what I was looking for. What are kids really learning about slavery? This was an article from theatlantic.com, February 1st, 2018, that talked about this study, Teaching Hard History of American Slavery. This is how I found out about it. And I put this in my presentations, and I teach from the study some also. And they did a survey of 1,000 high school seniors and to find out what they knew about slavery. And they found out only 8% of them could identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. Only 8% of high school seniors, 12th graders. 32%, only 32% can name the 13th Amendment as the formal end of slavery in the U.S. 35% thought it was the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, that did not free the enslaved Africans. And only 46% could identify the Middle Passage as the transport of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. All right. Now, the person who headed up the advisory panel that put this together is Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries is a nephew to Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries is an associate professor of history at Ohio State University. Now, I've interviewed him before here on our show, on the African History Network show. Okay, that's Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. So check this out. You can read this article, What Are Kids Really Learning About Slavery? And check out Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, from SPLcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLcenter.org. And I took the study, I took it to a printer, got it printed up. And when you look at it, page 6, they have it's a column here from Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. Okay. And it's a write-up from him in here on page 6, the preface, page 6 and 7 by Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. That's a bad brother right there. All right. So look, we're going to get out of here. Hopefully you learned something today. Hopefully you enjoy this. Register for our courses and look out for the African History Network show Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight. Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the information on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. Thanks for tuning in.